Welcome everyone to our part one, LEAD1 reopening venues webinar series. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Tom McMillan, the CEO of LEAD1. We want to give a special thanks to Gensler Sports for its support of LEAD1 and to Ryan Sickman for his participation as our moderator for this afternoon. And of course, thanks to all the panels who will be introduced momentarily. Before beginning, I want to just talk about just a second about LEAD1 and go to the first slide, which really talks about our organization and the reach of our organization, where we 800 folks, 850 registrants for today's webinar. And LEAD1, through its audiences, reaches 85% of the total buying power in college athletics. 25,000 college athletics employees in the FBS have access to our expertise and information resources every day. So with that little commercial, I'll turn over to Hannah for some housekeeping, and then we'll go right to Drew. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, all, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. For those who are new to the LEAD1 webinar world, I just want to quickly take you through a couple housekeeping items. For those joining us all in the attendee slot, you will all remain in a listen-only mode throughout the entire discussion. This is to eliminate some background noise. However, if you would like to speak, there are 3 ways in which you can do so. The first of which would be to use the raise hand function. This is located on your control panel. Depending on the device you're using, this will either be on the right side of your screen or the top or bottom toolbar. If you go ahead and press this raise hand function, it will notify me and I can unmute you individually. The second way to ask a question, and this is by far the most popular, is to ask a question directly using the questions tab. Please note that these questions will be read aloud. However, you will remain anonymous as the asker. And finally, you can ask a question using the chat box. However, please note that any questions asked here will be seen by everyone in the audience. So with that, I will pass it over to Ryan and we can get the conversation started.
Great, thanks, Hannah. Hi, my name is Ryan Sickman, and I'm the Global Director of Design for Sports for Gensler. I've been in the industry about 20 years now, working with a lot of you on this call in some form or fashion at some point in time. I bring a different perspective, but not unique, to these discussions as a former Division I soccer player, and now I do what I do in facility design. But enough about me. I'm really pleased to be the moderator for today's panel of professionals to discuss what it's really going to take to reopen your venues. With us today are Rob Hausman from Book Hill Partners, Russ Simons from Venue Solutions Group, and Drew Martin from the University of Texas at Austin. Rob's a partner at Book Hill Partners, and during the Clinton administration, he served as an assistant director for strategic planning in the White House Drug Czar's office. While at the White House, he also served in a variety of other positions and on a number of other delegations and task forces. Rob's going to be taking us through some of the modeling of ingress and egress, fan traffic management and control, and some thoughts around some short-term congestion mitigation measures. Also with us today is Russ Simons. Russ is a longtime colleague of mine, former coworker of mine as well, who I've personally known for about 15 years now. And I just learned this morning was hired by the father of our PR director for his job at the Nashville Arena. Russ is the chief listening officer and managing partner at Venue Solutions Group. Russ has spent more than 30 years in the sports facility industry, and he's dedicated his career to the field, winning several awards and working roles spanning design and construction in security, marketing, public relations, and operations. Russ is going to be using his expertise in the operations of our venues to take us through some venue sanitation procedures today, some social distancing ideas and PPE measures to implement, how we will be handling food service, staff safety, and training so we can all return to our venues as safely as possible. And lastly, with us today is Drew Martin. Drew is the Executive Senior Associate Athletic Director for External Affairs at Texas, where his responsibilities include oversight on fan engagement and the game day experience, among other things. Drew came to Texas with an extensive external services background ranging from trademark and licensing to marketing, social media, and communications. He joined the Longhorns after 7 years at TCU. Drew's going to be taking us through Texas's approach to address a return to campus, not just at the stadium, but really on all fronts. What are they doing on a daily basis to get their people, their students, and their fans back to campus? He's going to discuss the technology that they're using to be nimble in our ever-evolving landscape on a daily basis. And lastly, how they are approaching this in sort of an all-hands-on-deck fashion. Hopefully we have a good amount of time here at the end for Q&A, as I'm sure these topics are bound to solicit some pretty good questions here today. With that, let's get started and jump right in. I think Rob's going to kick us off.
Thanks, Ryan, and thanks to LEAD1 and Hannah and Tom for pulling this together. My background in college sports, I was a D3 lax player. My claim to fame is at one time the leading scorer of all time in D3 lax took me for like 8 goals in a game. So I've got that going for me. What I'm going to walk you through is the application of Regal's, which is where one of my positions is with Regal Decision System, our F2O facility flow optimization technology tool applied to a COVID-19 universe, right? What the tool is, it's a data analytic predictive simulation technology. And Hannah, next slide. So what you're seeing here is the tool in place. So this is to show you that it is more than pretty pictures. Watch the group at the top. Let me explain. Hannah, can you pause the video for a second, or will it run through a couple times? So what you're seeing here are 2 things. In the upper left-hand corner is camera dome footage from an evacuation of the Capitol. In the lower right is a simulation of an evacuation of the Capitol that was done about 2 years before this evacuation took place. Note, there's a cluster of people trying to get out the main entrance in the top of both. Remember, the simulation was done 2 years before the evacuation. Watch as it plays out what happens in the live camera footage and in the simulation, and you'll see an interesting break off because of behavioral science. People get packed in, they get nervous, and they move. Okay, Hannah, run tape, as they say, please. And in a second, you'll see it. There they go, in both. I show you this to say, this isn't made up stuff. This isn't guesstimates. This is a predictive analysis. Next slide. So what you're seeing here is a pre-COVID-19 bathroom. And you'll notice people move through pretty quickly. It's pretty easy. There are no long lines. Every facility is taken. Next slide. Now you're going to see it in a COVID social, using the CDC guidelines on social distancing, what that exact same facility looks like. And you'll notice we've done this in a building, but this is any stadium's bathroom in essence. So now you notice there's going to be a queue forming. You can just let it run. Notice that they're only using every other facility. Notice how long the line is. Pause it there for a sec if you can. So a couple of things to bear in mind. First of all, as you look at this, the difference in the bathroom now is, one, you have a really long line that's going to extend off to the left, even outside the bathroom. Think about that for your stadium. What does that look like in the hallway? How much space do you have in the bathroom? How much out? You've got to now think about managing this line. How are you going to do that to maintain distancing? Is it staffers? Is it ropes and stanchions? Is it markings on the floor? Inside the bathroom, how will people know to go to every other stall? Are you roping things off? Will you have staff in the bathroom? And let this run out for a second, Hannah, because you'll see how crowded it gets. So think about okay, so you can go to the next one, that's fine. Now I'm going to walk you through a security checkpoint. So we've put this one this is pre-COVID-19, and we've put it in a parking lot. It doesn't matter. This setup is essentially one magnetometer, one bag drop and pickup, and you'll see a crowd forms. Notice how packed in they are, right? Because we didn't have social distancing. It was fine. And you'll see as they go through, you're not seeing the mag and the security station, but we've timed it out so you get a sense of how they move through it. Just imagine the magnetometer, imagine the security screening. Now, go to the next slide, please, if you would. Now you're going to see this with COVID-19 CDC guidance applied. Couple of things to note. Watch how big the queue area goes. From being that nice, tight, packed in setup, it's going to grow markedly. Where does that queue exist in your facility? How are you going to maintain that queue? Again, is it ropes and stanchions? Is it markings on the ground? Is it staff? Bear in mind that this is going to change all of your thinking around How long does it take people to get through security? Are we seating in one group? Are you doing flights of groups? You know, boarding group A, boarding group B. Is there one entry time? Is there, do tickets have specific doors that they go through? What does that look like? And one other thing I want to pause on this. We're not simulating here a health screening component. So if you add a health screening component here, what does that look like? I don't know anybody that's ever screened everybody for health going into a sporting event in my life. Maybe some of the other folks who've been at this much longer, Russ, Drew, Ryan do, but when has anybody ever taken everybody's temperature? And if so, where does that take place? How long does that take? How do you do that with no contact? And do you want them to do that here at security, or do you want them to do that at the entrance by the parking lot? Because here, look at all those people who would be exposed by one person coming in who's now going to fail a temperature check, and you're going to have to contact trace them and figure out where do you send them and what happens to the group they're with and where do they go. All of those questions are things you're going to have to look at, and you may want to simulate and know what it looks like in advance. All right, next slide, please. We all know that bathrooms are a problem. And Hannah, just pause it right there for a sec. So everybody knows, we could all anticipate that bathrooms are a big problem. What I'm showing you here now are, this is taken from the data that we used. We did simulations for the Secret Service, for the DNC at 2016 at Wells Fargo. This is the Democratic National Convention, but it could just as easily be the Flyers or the 76ers who both play at Wells Fargo, or a college basketball tournament, for example. Note, the top one is the way it functioned pre-COVID-19. And you're going to notice a couple things. The flow of people around the ring is contraflow. They go everywhere and whenever and wherever they want, just like we used to in stadiums. You're going to notice the escalator moves smoothly and people come off the escalator fairly well and move with the flow. The bottom is COVID-19 social distancing requirements. And I want to flag a couple things. One, notice there is no contraflow. The entire ring of this stadium is now one way. And think about how you get people to understand that and do that. That's a first layer challenge. Second, notice that because of the way people get off an escalator using behavioral science, we break down social distancing. So in this simulation, the solution that was tried was to stop the escalator. You guys in facility management know the minute you stop an escalator, most fire marshals say you cannot start it again. Your escalator has now become stairs. Unless you want that, you have to step back and rethink the solution. You can let it run, Hannah, if you would, please. And so if the escalator's stopping like it is there, if you want it to run, what does that mean? That means you probably need 10 foot of distancing coming onto the escalator. That means that you probably need a staffer at the bottom of the stairs. That means you need a queue area. How big? I don't know. We can simulate that, but I don't know offhand what that is. All I know is you have the same queue challenges now at the bottom of this escalator in terms of what is the footprint? How do you maintain spacing and all of that? And now you've got to steer people one way around the stadium. Massive set of changes, which will change facility use, bathroom use, concessions, and all of that in a cascading effect. And also, again, how do these things get communicated to your stakeholders, your ticket holders, and all of that, ideally before they show up? Next slide, Hannah. Okay, so this one is I think, very thought-provoking. What we've taken here is a standard stadium, modern era stadium, based upon normal dimensions. It's probably going to look like the upper deck of most of your stadiums for those of you who maintain or have own operate stadiums. Couple of things to note. Based upon CDC guidance, you will notice, again, no contraflow. All of the aisles, both up and down and around, are single directional flow. How does that work for seating people? What does that do in terms of people going in and out? One other thing that you don't see here, but based upon this layout and based upon standard seating dimensions in a normal stadium like this, we are estimating, and everybody catch your breath, that you're at 20 to 30% maximum seating capacity. That is also not, that number is max. That depends on your facilities and other things, which is going to impact your ticketing strategies. Like, am I ticketing the whole stadium, or am I only doing premium seating? Am I ticketing a student section? What does that look like? We don't know yet, but it may mean that it's better to spread people out. So yeah, ticket the upper deck. But if there are facility constraints that limit facilities, maybe you don't ticket the upper deck. Maybe you're only doing premium seatings and looking for high ROI in terms of cheeks and seats. And what does that mean in terms of, so take one other quick look at those tunnels. So those tunnels scare me. Why? Because what happens when you go to a game? I want to get a beer or a burger or a dog. I get up in the middle of play, I go down, I go outside, I get my dog, I come back, and I'm trying to get in. And it's not just me doing that, it's me and 20 other people. And there's an usher who says, "I'm sorry, sir, play is ongoing. You need to wait for a break in play." So now there are 20 of us in that tunnel pushing forward because we all want to see this next play, and we are in a cluster. That probably cannot happen in this post-COVID-19 world. That's going to have to be managed differently to get people either pushed out and distanced in the tunnel space if you can, or you're going to have to move them through, and people are going to have to deal with somebody pushing through, you know, as the third out of the inning plays out. Next slide. What I've tried to do is just kind of give you some quick notes. Before we jump to next, let me flag a couple of things. I didn't show you parking lots. Parking lots raise the exact same set of challenges, and we have simulated them. So think about your spaces, think about tailgating. What about ingress and egress at stadiums that are urban stadiums or are situated within your campus air footprint? How does security work? What does no or low contact security look like? Are your tickets digital? Are you doing contact tracing? If so, does your digital ticketing app feed into your contact tracing? And lastly, to get people out to these games, it's no longer Field of Dreams. It's not build it and they will come. People are going to want reassurances. How are you going to show them, prove to them that you can do this safely before they walk in with their 6 kids or 3 kids or whatever kids and sit down at a game in your stadium? Thanks very much.
Thanks, Rob. Hey, Russ, before we jump in, I want to sort of go to you and Drew here and just pick your brain on something that Rob had just mentioned too. As I know, Russ, you're looking at opening SoFi with potential occupancy there. Actually, it's where you're at right now. But the question about one-way aisles and rows and seating the seating bowl. I know, Drew, you're looking at a number of different occupancy scenarios for different percentages of occupancy. How have the two of you specifically thought through the one-way nature of aisles, access to your seats, and take us through your thought strategy on that before we jump into Russ's stuff?
Drew, you want to kick it off?
Sure, happy to. Ryan, appreciate the question, and Rob, really awesome thoughts. A lot that everybody needs to think about as we go through all of this, and it changes every day, and it's so fluid. And Ryan, as you mentioned, I mean, we've looked at everything at Texas. We've modeled social distancing in Darrell K. Royal Texas Memorial Stadium. It seats about 100,000. We know that that's not possible right now. The governor's latest mandate, we started a few weeks ago with the governor of the state of Texas, telling us that we could be at 25% capacity in outdoor stadiums, which DKR is. And then most recently, he's upped that to 50%. Well, our social modeling, if we were to stay with a true 6-foot radius and working with our physicians and our health experts, you know, we're only, you know, somewhere between 30 and 35% in that case. But it's a timely question. I had a conversation with Arthur Johnson yesterday and Amy Folan, two of my counterparts on our leadership team here. And we'll talk about how we've kind of divided and conquered our approach to getting back to campus and getting back to events a little bit later on this call. But Arthur, you know, let us know at DKR, we actually have a situation where most of our aisles have 2 portals in it. And so you're going to have an ingress in the lower portal and an egress in the upper portal, or vice versa. So you actually have discussed this one-way traffic ideology of people coming in one direction and going out in the other direction. And we're just fortunate to have a stadium large enough to have double portals in most of the bowl.
Yeah, to build on what Drew said, I mean, Drew hit a couple of things that are really important. One is what we do. We don't make your decisions for you. We empower them. We let you see how they play out in advance, a crystal ball. But for example, if the governor says you're at 50% capacity and you're a state-owned facility and the governor has that authority, guess what? You're at 50% authority, 50% seating. We can show you what it looks like, but it's his call or the AD's call or whoever makes that call. The second thing I would note is Drew points out the importance of knowing your environment, right? So in that stadium, because of their specific portals, you may be able to have contraflow. In other stadiums, because of the layout or certain quirks, maybe you could get to 50%. Maybe you can safely. All we can do is show you this is the CDC guidelines in general. Until you look at your specific facility, it's just sort of best practices that have to be adapted to your environment.
All right, Russ, floor is yours, my friend.
Russ, it sounds as though we've lost your audio. You may need to unmute yourself.
Sorry. The discussion here just illustrates the inherent conflict between trying to get as many people in the building as humanly possible, and then also the limited challenges that are going to happen with regard to the unique structure that each and everybody has. As I move into the areas here, and as I hear this discussion, I literally could spend an hour on each one of these. And so my intention here is not to just sort of drag you through my life in COVID, but try to give you at least some ways to think about some of these areas. When you get the actual recording of this and the slides, I will include a bunch of slides that have to do with more of the specifics about technology, particularly in the venue sanitation. I will tell you that the venue sanitation, just like everything else that's related to COVID right now, we started out on a really macro, here are some big things we think we understand or the things we need to do to protect ourselves based on what limited knowledge we had. It's important to understand we've only been in this thing for about 5 months. So the idea, the concept that folks get frustrated like, well, you said this, but now it's that. Well, yeah, that's because we're learning more about this in each and every day. We've now learning, in terms of there's a lot more visibility from cleaning. What does cleaning mean? It's what we always did in the past. What does deep cleaning mean? Simple explanation, nooks and crannies. Cleaning is surfaces and obvious door handles, all of those kinds of things. Deep cleaning is really saying, hey, we're going to go into deeper areas overall. And then we get into whether we're going to discuss it as sanitization or disinfecting. There are I know you guys know this already. There's lots of snake oil coming out of every pore right now in terms of people who have technologies and they have products and that type of thing. The good news is there is some science that can help you, and probably the most important resource that you should have and be aware of is really the EPA's what's called N list. The EPA's N list actually will tell you what products are actually designed or capable of actually being useful in any different type of an environment. And even though there's the SARS-2 COVID-19 is still relatively new, because COVID is not a unique virus, that you can get some comfort about looking at things that were effective against SARS, were effective against other COVID types of environments. So, a multi-step process: cleaning, deep cleaning, sanitization. There's a new watchword in everybody's world right now, which is called wet time or dwell time. We're used to actually in a restaurant, you get up on the table, you leave, someone sprays something, wipes the table off, and then you leave. Well, that might get the table clean, but it doesn't do anything for sanitization. So now, depending on what the product is and what you look at that product in the EPA N list, dwell time can be, depending on the strength of the product, everything from 1 minute to 10 minutes. And that means it's how long you have to leave it on to be assured that it's actually gonna actually affect the product no matter what. There is some technology out there that is, again, not specifically virus-based, but something I would encourage all of us to be paying attention to, and that would be ATP testing, adenine triphosphate. Basically, it's more of a bacteriological indicator than it is for a virus. But from what we found in the field is if you're cleaning for bacteria, you're likely to be actually accomplishing your goal as it relates to viruses and other issues. And so not selling this or any other product in particular, that's not what I'm about. But looking at ATP testing, some of that, because you were in a university setting, you may be already activating. Also, because you're in a college and university, you've got one of the best environments. I mean, if you go find whoever, either on the veterinarian side or the health side, you got a level 2, a level 3, a level 4 lab, biology professors. You have a lot more access to actual information versus hyperbole than maybe the rest of the industry overall. I would also share with you that I believe that the collegiate environment is the most complicated environment we face. If you just look at the continuum of people that you have to serve, from student athletes all the way to longtime donors, you have so many different audiences that you have to actually manage. And add on to that, 20 some odd, depending on your location, different sports. We tend to focus on football, and we're highly focused on that because it's next. But obviously winter sports are following, and then we add into the spring sports. So there's a lot of work to do, and each one of those may need to be looked at differently, both forward facing to the fan, but also in terms of what are the policies and procedures that you're going to do to keep your student athletes safe and happy. There are lots of different equipment and technology out there. I would share with you that a lot of things like electrostatic sprayers. There are lots of tools and techniques. I was on a previous call this morning where we talked about in the South, because of the heat, misting units, and what can we do to keep, I think the way it was phrased is, what's more dangerous? Is the risk of potentially catching COVID more dangerous, or the risk of overheating in a really hot summer day in Texas? I've worked at Texas. I know that they have hydration stations and misting units and all of that. Now, how do we actually deploy those in a way that we don't exacerbate the risk associated with COVID? So all of this is nothing more than you really know with regard to sanitation, that it is immensely complex. But I will tell you, and I've used the word theater about this, but not in a negative way. It is going to be critically important for people coming to your events to see visible and obvious evidence of cleaning and sanitation. Now, in the past, we actually focused on a Disney model, which is all of the mechanics of supporting the guest experience were hidden. They disappeared. We picked uniforms that made the people who were performing those functions kind of disappear into the public, into the scheme, into the concourse. Well, what we learned post 9/11 on security is absolutely applicable here. We need to change our vision of this. People want to be reassured. They want to see that there are people who are out there creating an environment where they can have quiet enjoyment, where they can enjoy themselves. We're going to want to see cleaning people. No disrespect here, but in the vast majority of the circumstances I see, cleaning people equate movement with the successful conducting of their business. Now it can't just be movement, but it's got to be doing the things that we say they're going to do. Robert brought up a pretty good issue about restrooms. So overall in restrooms, I'll tell you, I'm not going to actually stagger or do anything different with regard to lavatory stalls for both men's and women's. I think those are sort of encapsulated environments that I don't want to take any issues with. But you may have to, if you don't have partitions, you may have to, and it may be more comfortable in your environment. Remember, your community is going to be the important lens which you go through this. If you just say, hey, well, Russ said to do this, and it's not exactly aligned with the culture of your community, then yeah, you've got trouble. In fact, you've got trouble whatever if you do anything I tell you to do. So the idea here is you really need to look at that. Also, I'm expecting that you're going to need porters and matrons inside the restrooms from now on who are actually visibly active in conducting these sanitation procedures. You cannot queue in the restroom like we do at every football game, regardless of whether it's Division III all the way up to the top levels. You're going to have to queue outside, as that was illustrated in the modeling from Robert. In fact, if you get access to modeling, or you've had any experience in this, you'll find is that modeling is, I find it to be immensely helpful because it is accurate. And even though it may not be exact, it is going to tell you about what people are going to do. And in this case, it's going to actually inform you in terms of where people go and how to manage them. Now, I will tell you that both this and in food service and in security, and I'll blend some of this together in the sake of time, I'm not trying to actually create a queue that goes 170 people deep. I'll talk a little bit about temperature control and all that and the security scheming. But right now, I basically have a concept that says that there's a soft queue of people gathering to a hard queue where we're actually going to enforce social distancing. Now, if you're in a security screening environment, you might, depending on your facility, have a little bit more room to actually impose that hard queue, but you're still going to have people gathering on the other side. And the truth of the matter is, and an honest conversation is all I want to have here, is you don't have enough people and resources to actually keep people from gathering if they don't want to gather. So you're going to have to come to some relative balance as to what hill to die on. In this case, the areas that you control, then you take control of those. And the other areas, you're going to need to message. You might have to have some coaches and ambassadors and out there trying to remind people and keep it at the top of mind. But you're going to be making accommodations in any of these types of circumstances. When I look at concessions, traditional belly up concessions, or what we would do sometimes in serpentine queuing, depending on your circumstances, and a belly up, I might impose social distancing on an average concourse, let's say, 3 or 4 people deep, and after that, it's going to be that soft queue, and people are going to make decisions on how comfortable they are in gathering. It's just actual life here, right? When we talk about Robert's example of going up escalators, that type of thing, Americans will not walk upstairs, right? So they will actually miss a quarter of a game or a period of a game to ride an escalator up a single level. They do not actually have a problem walking downstairs, but they won't walk upstairs. Also, you mentioned the fire marshal with regard to the escalator being off. I can just tell you that you should never walk on an escalator that's not running. There are that whole different set of technical. Don't do it. Okay. So from a sanitization, I'm done with sanitization. I've hit on social distancing, protective equipment measures. Listen, I would tell you that we're all going to be better off. We're going to have a better job of attacking the virus if we all wear masks. Are we all going to wear masks? No. What part of that hill are you going to die on? You just have to decide what's important in your community. I can tell you, being at the airport in Los Angeles, California, and being at the airport in Austin, Texas, are different experiences, all right? So it's got to be appropriate for what you have. With regard to food service, there's a couple of key points about for food service. Really thinking about the menu items, thinking about the packaging, the vessels that those are in, and then also cashless is coming up everywhere. I think there's a strong feeling about cashless, but there are locations in the United States where it is illegal to actually not have cash. So where is the balance in that? Can you go mostly cashless? Kind of a reverse when credit cards started. We might have had one credit card line in a linear concession stand. Maybe it's different now. Maybe that most of it's going to be credit card, and there are lines or two points of sale that for cashless. Again, this is going to be driven by what you can do in your operating environment. Really different state by state, and really different in terms of what your customers accept. But I think maybe some of the products you sell and the packaging you put in might be different. How you handle grab and goes. There's been a really strong move towards grab and go because people do not want to wait in line. We know the science of how long people will wait in line. And when the line gets longer than that, they're going to go do something else. So they want to grab something quickly. They want to be able to move out. Now you can make grab and go as onerous as you want. You can make everybody hand sanitize before they go in. You can have staff in a grab and go or a marche type of environment actually hand people the product they want. Or you can, if it's appropriate, you can say, hey, all of this based on the revised CDC guidelines that surface contact is not a major form of infection for the disease, and really put it on the customer to know that they have to wash their hands with warm soap and water for 20 seconds. I mean, every one of these decisions is going to be unique to your operation. The last thing I'll touch on is going to be temperature screening. In an honest conversation, I will tell you, I think temperature screening is more theater than effective. That has to do with 30 to 35% of people being asymptomatic. It has to do with up to 70% of the people who are presenting COVID-19 symptoms in an emergency room not having an elevated temperature. But right now, it's a key component of every plan, from Tesla to Disneyland to Universal Theaters, Orange County Convention Center. It's all a part of it. So in fact, if you don't do it, you're going to get the they syndrome, which is they aren't even doing this, then that means they aren't doing anything else, and that means they aren't making sure that I'm going to be safe. So I think you have to do it. I will share with you that it's going to go away. The forward-facing stuff for your customers is going to go away. I think it's a 2-year period. Anybody can argue that. That's the science of Russ Simons. I plan to do it in employees, and I plan to continue it in employees, because casual staff come to work ill. They work multiple jobs, they live paycheck to paycheck, and I have been looking to do this for a long time. So I am going to use this, as you should in other areas in the analysis of your operation, as a tipping point to say we're going to do things differently. If you just did something different for the sake of doing it, regardless if it was right or wrong, then we'd be like, well, why are they doing that? Why can't we just go back to yesterday? In this case, we can impose some of these new policies and procedures, thoughtful and purposeful moves. And so I will continue to do that with employees going forward for the reasons that I've stated. Training, there's lots of training right now and lots more coming. You know, we have training for food safe, we have training for sanitization, now we have to have training for COVID. There's just no end to what's going to happen. Just don't think that what we know today is going to be accurate tomorrow. I know you're looking for hope from someone like me. Well, I hope you listen to me, that tomorrow is going to be different from today, because we are learning something new every day, and we have to keep our minds open. We have to be flexible and adaptable in our plans, and that's how we're going to be successful on behalf of our customers, our brand, our institution, and our partners going forward. So now I want to hear from Drew about how flexible he's going to be.
Russ, I appreciate it. I haven't been flexible in a long time, my friend. It's been a while since I've seen flexibility. But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is such an evolving process, and I think I've used the word fluid to describe a situation more times in the last 5 months than ever in my life. But that's the fact of the matter. And you know, to touch on, you know, the public tolerance, and Austin is a vibrant, growing, you know, major metropolitan area in the country, which means we've got just a tremendous cross section of life and variable tolerances. But what I'm seeing out on Town Lake and on the hiking trails and on all of the wonderful outdoor activities that we have to offer the community here in Austin, it's all over the map. You know, you go by some restaurants and the patios are packed. You go by other restaurants and everybody's wearing masks, and they've got, you know, X's on the concrete where people can stand. But you go into the public spaces, particularly the lakes and the trails, and it's just a free for all. And so there is a large degree there of knowing your consumer base, knowing your audience. And then, as we talked about before, you know, we're under the auspices of the governor of the state of Texas, being a state agency, and the University of Texas. We're going to have a lot of input from our politicians and from our health officials that are directed by the state. So, you know, we do have to be flexible with that. So what I want to do is kind of take you through, because a lot of folks on the call are on college campuses, and while there is a lot of discussion about, you know, how are we going to get back to events, and we're talking specifically patron events, and in the you know, college world, you know, football does tend to be the economic enterprise for a majority of our schools. So, you know, we are paying attention to that first, being the largest venue that we have, and knowing that there's a lot of attention, particularly in the state of Texas, on football. But we can't get to that until, as most campuses are and have been, you know, we've been all working from home. Our students were sent home to digital online learning for the remainder of spring semester, and a lot into summer semesters. Some schools are bringing students back in summer. We're not bringing students back onto campus until the fall semester begins. And so really, you know, I'm going to take us through kind of how we approached our phase in of even just getting back to campus physically for anybody. We'll touch a little bit on the technology, to your point, to be nimble and flexible in the space. And then really how we kind of took this all hands approach, and will continue to as we move forward. So the first thing, if we'll go to the next slide, I can take us through is, we broke this down. Chris Del Conte, our athletics director at UT, about mid to late April. So we're a month into work from home, maybe 6 weeks, not quite, into work from home. And the discussion was, okay, guys, this is not going to last forever. And Russ, whether it's a 1-year cycle, a 2-year cycle, I tend to agree with you. I lean more towards this is a 2-year problem and not a 1-year problem. But that's my own personal opinion. But we are going to get back to campus. So how do we do that? So Chris asked leaders on his executive team to form 4 primary focus committees. First, how are we going to get our employees back? Before we talk about bringing the kids back, before we talk about fans and getting facilities ready for events, how are we going to bring our employees back? So Sean Eichhorst, our deputy athletics director, took that committee. For student athletes, after the employees are back, how are we going to onboard the student athletes once we're allowed to do so? So Chris Plonsky, our chief of staff and over student athlete services, she manages that committee. Facilities and events, which is a major undertaking of what you two gentlemen just talked about, of how do you get your facilities ready logistically. And Darrell Royal, there are parts of our football stadium that date back, I believe, to 1924. This is not a modern, brand new facility. It's been cobbled together over almost a century now. So Arthur Johnson has the wonderful task being our executive senior associate over facilities and event operations. So Arthur has that committee, and then fan and donor engagement, which is kind of an ongoing process from ticket renewals, refund policies, how are we going to engage, how are we going to communicate, and then into that actual in-game experience, when you do come onto campus, the things that you've been used to when you come to an event. How are we going to tackle that? So Amy Folan, who heads up our Longhorn Foundation and our ticket operations, and myself, we kind of tag team that. And then obviously our committee and Arthur's committee are very closely aligned together, but we got to work in May, and to your point, Russ, it has been just a moving target since we started. Every day, every week, sometimes hour by hour, we're getting new information that's affecting the decisions that we think we're making right now, and we do have to be flexible. We have to be of that mindset of, as Chris likes to tell us, guys, it's June 10th. Our first football game is September 5th. Time is, of the essence, but it's June 10th today. What we know today will not be what we know on July 10th or August 10th, and certainly not on September 5th. So the first thing we did was we wrote down, and here's a sampling of a lot of subcommittees there, and there have been more. So I'm actually sampling a lot of this information from kind of high-level executive summaries that were presented to the president of the university back in late May. So even in a few weeks since then, we've changed some of the stuff. So if you go to the next slide, we'll take you through the employee protocols that we used. So the first is we're going to follow CDC, state and local health and safety guidelines. With every committee, and in fact every one of our daily executive team meetings, it's led off by our head of medicine, Dr. James Bray, and our head of athletics training and sports medicine, Alan Harden. They give us an update every day on what's happening, not just in our community, but throughout the country, and the science behind what's going on. So that's going to be kind of the governing stipulations in all these committees. But the employees, they developed a plan. We phased in the approach. We set forward medical checkpoints, temperature screenings, requiring you wearing masks. We tested out on a small sample group of employees to get us through, is this the right flow? And then we gradually began to bring back essential employees that needed to be on campus to do their jobs, and put them through this protocol with kind of a 14-day test period here, right? Like, can we keep people safe? Can we bring people back onto campus safely through these protocols over a 14-day period without seeing an exposure, without seeing any type of infection? And fortunately, we've been able to do that thus far. And so if we can prove that, then we can begin to expand it out. But the general mantra has been, only if you absolutely need to go to campus should you be there. There's no reason to expose yourself or potentially expose anybody else, just in case you're asymptomatic and aren't aware that you're carrying COVID. There's no reason to do that. So once we got that settled, then we moved on, and the next slide will show the student athlete bring back plan, which we are just now beginning. In fact, at the start of this, I'm sorry, this is the traffic plan that we did use to bring people in, and we communicated this out to anybody that comes on campus. You have to go through a request process through Smartsheet to even get permission by HR and your executive team member to even be on campus. And then once you are, you must fill out a health questionnaire and then go through your temperature checkpoint, wear your mask. There's hand sanitizer everywhere. There's procedures on how to wipe down your desk and your work environment. And then there's time limits of when you can and can't be on campus and when you must leave by, just in order to keep us all safe and give our custodial crew the time to continue to clean and deep clean our areas. So now the next slide will show the student athlete comeback plan. And it goes through, from sports medicine, obviously hygiene, the PPE that's required and recommended. How do we act in our football equipment area when we do bring our football players back to get equipment? How is our staff there going to function? Student services and academics, we're doing almost everything online and virtually right now, and can continue to do that for the foreseeable future. Compliance as well. There's a lot of work to bring back and certainly onboard newcomers to our program into the academic environment. And so how is compliance gonna operate there? And then touching on travel for competition. And I want to reiterate that these are plans that were developed in late April and in May, and they've changed a little bit since then. And they're changing daily as we get new information. But even with the Big 12, I think this was a timeline that looked at a June 1. I think the NC2A had put out June 1, we'd be allowed to start bringing kids back. And then the Big 12 conference ADs got together and they actually, determined that it would be June 15. And so we had to move the timeline there to June 15, and that was for football. So that hasn't hit yet. We're still 5 days from actually having football players be able to participate in voluntary workouts. Then July 1 for men's and women's basketball, cross country, soccer, volleyball, and then your June 15 for the rest of the sports. And so as of right now, our primary focus has been on, can we use these protocols to effectively bring back our football team and put them into the weight room and put them onto fields and use locker rooms? Can we prove, the theory that we put in place and the plans that we put in place do work to keep our student athletes safe? And how do we tweak and adjust that, if we see potential downfalls in the plans that we have now before the July 1 deadline? And then as we get more in place, and effectively do that, how do we make tweaks and adjustments to bring, everyone back to that July 15 timeline? So this is an evolutionary process as we go through. So if we go to the next slide, this is going to talk about our fan and donor focus committees. There has been a lot of communication, certainly with season ticket renewals, even just with ending the baseball and softball seasons. A lot of questions around refunds, a lot of questions, Russ, to your point about, how are you going to keep us safe? What are you going to do? Is there going to be temperature checking? So a lot of this has been on, stewardship, on communications, on the functional of processing the donations, credits, and refunds. And then as we look at in those premium spaces, particularly with our donors, how is catering going to look? How are we going to cater to suites and to club areas? Buffets are a thing of the past, and that was our typical go-to of even our suite areas, of having common buffet areas to encourage this community environment among our suite holders. We're not going to see that, and if we do, it's certainly not going to look like it did before with just open buffets where people can approach it on their own and serve themselves. And we're still working through what that looks like, as well as with the logistics committee as well. And so we're just now, as we get into testing and bringing back our football student athletes in phases to get them ready for this June 15 go date. We're now turning our attention to really sharpen the fan and donor focused work here to get us a more realistic plan of how exactly it is going to work when it comes to things like elevators, escalators, stairwells, ingress, egress. And if we go to the next slide, you can kind of see how this dovetails into Arthur Johnson's committee of facilities and events, and just with football at that key center point, with safety being what is going to go, as our primary function at the heart of this. There's so much to a game day and to an event, but it all comes to the collaborative way that we're going to tackle this and inviting people into the space. And I think this probably is the largest and certainly is the most number of subcommittees of any of our 4 main committees, because there's so much that goes into a football game day at the University of Texas, and the expectation level, right? It was mentioned early on in the process. Our grocery stores here have done a fantastic job from the get-go of really monitoring ingress egress, of having the little circle dots on the ground of where you can stand at 6 feet apart, and everybody's really behaving. So they say, well, can't we just adopt that model? And the reality is, no. There's a difference between the basic need to go to the grocery store and find your milk and your eggs and the things that your family needs to continue to cook and eat at home, than paying a lot of money to come to a football game to be entertained. There's just a different level of expectation and a different level of entitlement. And so how are we going to simultaneously deliver on our brand promises, deliver on our fan first mentality, but shift that thinking that fan first does come at the base layer of keeping you safe? And so that's the onus on us, is develop these plans and communicate them out effectively as we approach that first home football game, that these are the steps we have taken. These are the things that you're going to see. This is what you expect of us, but this is also our expectation of you. And Russ, back to one of your questions earlier, where I struggle a lot with this is, we can set all those expectations and we can all nod our heads and agree that yes, wearing masks is what the CDC is saying is the safest, and yes, social distancing is the safest. What are we physically prepared to do on a game day when someone refuses to wear a mask, or someone does not want to stay 6 feet apart and wants to sit right next to their buddy, even though we've social distanced the stadium, if we do in fact go with that model at the end of this? To your question about the temperature scanning, we've looked at that. The temperature scan devices on the magnetometers as you come in, it all sounds wonderful, and I agree there is a lot of theater to it, but the reality behind it is, in the airport now, back after 9/11 happened, if we can all think back to that, they put in a lot more of the screenings and checks and the metal detectors, and only ticketed patrons were allowed to go through, as opposed to just anybody at that point. When those metal detectors went off, we all stopped and looked, and there was a little bit of a fear and panic, right? What are you bringing through? What's happening right now? Now it's commonplace. I stand in a line and 10 people, the metal detector goes off, and they move to the side. It's no big deal, whatever. If that temperature scan goes off and alerts that this person is above the temperature level, and you're in line, even if you're social distance, I worry about, what do you do? Are we causing more of a problem and more of a panic than really what it should be there for? And if it is just about theater, then are we just going to wind up seeing people flipping the thing off and making sure it turns green just to go through as a theatric measure? I worry about stuff like that as we get deeper into some of this technology. So speaking of technology, if we can go to the next slide, we made a decision very early on that we were going to go with kind of a mobile first mentality as we get back to this. We knew we had about a 5 or 6 month pause in athletics events that we're all responsible for. Made the decision to go to mobile only ticketing, knowing that we had a lot of time. This is going to be a seismic shift for our fan base, to go away from paper tickets to mobile tickets. But we have a runway here to take the time to effectively teach and educate our fan base on how this is going to work. So we've gone that way. We're in the process right now of completely redeveloping our official mobile app with our app partner in order to integrate mobile ticketing, integrate the mobile concessions ordering, integrate mobile fan engagement activities. The old days of throwing out the t-shirts and handing out the coupons and the pizza boxes and having an MC go up in the crowd and interview somebody, that's not going to happen this year. Hopefully that'll come back because it's a lot of fun. But that's not going to happen this year. And so how are we going to engage you with our giant big screen? Is there technology that we can put on your phone where you can participate in fan polls, or even games on the screen during timeouts? Are there things that we can do to continue to engage and excite you? And then mobile publications. I'm not sure that we're going to be in a position to hand out, playbills or hand out coupons that the local sponsor wants us to hand out. So how are we going to transition and make all of these digital engagements and digital activations that can appear on your phone, and we can engage with you one-to-one. It's things that we've all talked about, that we're all moving in this direction. Well, now's the time, and here's a very, very good reason and a concentrated runway to move us that far forward in this technology. I know the pros have been engaged in this area, but colleges lag behind. It's time to catch up. And then I've got a nice little example down there. This was a sample that our concessionaire sent us of the very, very low tech plexiglass technology at concession stands of, testing different ways to provide barrier shields, even if fans are ordering, but to add that additional layer of protection from the patron to the concessions employee when picking up their food. So, technology can range everything from high tech to low tech. We've got to think about it in many, many different ways. And this is on top of the multiple hand sanitization stations, the hand washing stations, the real visibility pieces of it, as you mentioned, whether it's porters in restrooms, whether it's just an increase in custodial staff around the stadium that aren't just there to be seen, but you can see that they're actively cleansing the areas, mopping, wiping, making sure that the supplies are all refilled. So these are just some of the ways that we're going to engage technology in addition to kind of the lower tech things. And then the last slide, and this is really what I want to leave you with. This is an all-in approach. We know that our fans are going to expect, our employees, our student athletes, and our fans are going to expect more from us to keep them safe. The onus is on us to provide that security to them. And unfortunately, we're going to see less revenue in the short term from it. If we're to decrease capacity stadium to 50% or 30%, that's a huge revenue hit. When football takes that kind of revenue hit, it's felt throughout the entire department. And so what does that look like? So far our sponsors, the University of Texas, have stayed on board and stayed in the boat with us, but there's no real new revenue coming in. People aren't looking to jump on the bandwagon right now, as of, again, it's June 10. But we are going to see less revenue. So we're going to have to do more with less. And finding this new normal is going to take times and conversations like these we're discussing at the conference level. There's many, many focus groups that all of us participate in on the national level with colleagues, discussing this thing and sharing the best practices, because we don't know. There's not a rule book for this. There's not a playbook for this. We know the theories. We know what should we do to keep our people safe internally and externally. As Chris Delconte likes to say, the unfortunate part is you want to make God laugh, make a plan. So we're making a lot of plans right now, but we know that we're not going to hit the nail on the head just in an isolated bubble. So we're going to need to rely on one another in the industry to learn and utilize best practices as we go. In addition to knowing our own individual fan bases. The University of Texas in Austin is a completely different field than maybe our colleagues in the conference at Oklahoma State and Stillwater, Oklahoma. Two different tolerance levels, two different mentalities, two different approaches. It's not a one size fits all. But this will be a massive team effort where we're going to ask all of our staff, whether that's being fan ambassadors at the gates to help patrons figure out, the issues they're having with mobile ticketing, or to point out, where the hand sanitization stations are, just to provide that extra layer of comfort. We're going to call on everybody. It has to be an all-in approach to solve this. So that's where I want to leave you.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Drew. And just for everybody on the phone and the panelists as well too, Hannah has offered to extend this webinar till 3:10, 3:15 if we wanted to continue with questions. I know we've got a few that have come in. I've got a few myself that I think would elicit some conversation here. So if you guys would entertain that idea, I'd be happy to stay on and get this thing done. So I think we'll start off there. There's a bunch of questions for you, because I think there's a lot of applicability to what you guys are going through. So there's a lot specifically said. This question is for Drew. But first and foremost, this one's pretty easy. Just to confirm, your student athletes are phasing in later this summer, but football is phasing in earlier. Is that correct?
Yes, the Big 12 timelines, off the top of my head, they're June 15 is football is allowed to begin participating in on-campus voluntary activities, followed by our fall sports, soccer, volleyball, cross country on that July 1 timeline. There was some discussion about, does men's and women's basketball move up to that July 1? Frankly, I cannot remember if that's been amended or not. But then all the rest of the sports would be able to come back July 15. And again, these are all, allowance timelines. It's kind of like the governor saying you can be at 50%. Just because you can be at 50% doesn't mean that we're going to be at 50%. I, being revenue guy and an external guy, I would love to be at 50%. I'm not sure our medical experts would love that necessarily, but the same thing here. I believe the University of Oklahoma, even though the football teams are allowed to be back on June 15, I think that staff determined that they would prefer to bring their football student athletes back on July 1. So it's kind of a not before date, not a mandated, get these folks back on this day.
Yeah. I've got a ticketing question next for you, Drew. With respect to, you mentioned you're going to go to mobile ticketing, and I think most of the industry is going to do that as well too. That's at least almost every single conversation we've been having is going that way. But how specifically are you handling recruit tickets, will call tickets, player and family stuff? How are you dealing with those sort of one-off access things that aren't just sort of a typical ticket for you all?
Sure. And so, we say mobile only, and clearly that won't work in certain circumstances if a patron doesn't have a smartphone. If you are at the venue and you drop your smartphone on the ground and it breaks, if you run out of battery, unfortunately that's happened to me one time at an airport. It's not a pleasant experience. We will have remote locations around the stadium that will be a kind of a trouble resolution area where they could print a Boca stock, just a generic ticket for that particular game day. We're not really publicizing or advertising that. With the player guests, I believe that is the system that we are going to utilize is more of that hard generic Boca ticket. We feel like we can handle that on a game by game basis. In terms of will call, if you have a ticket, we're going to issue it in a digital way, and we're going to spend the summer starting in July taking you through kind of a week by week little step-in snippet approach of this week here's how to transfer a ticket, this week here's how to download a ticket, this is where your wallet is, this is what happens when you get to the gate. So we're going to publish in kind of I think it's texasports.com/go mobile is what we're developing right now to be kind of our one-stop resource of all things mobile, whether it's concessions, ticketing. But ticketing is going to be a big part of that, and we'll lay out kind of a schedule of how we're going to walk you through and handhold you through the process. But yeah, there will be some really specific one-off pieces that just can't be mobile, and we're ready to tackle that. But that's certainly not the first approach.
Yeah, Russ, I had a question for you as it relates to, you had mentioned as part of the operations of the food service component of what you were taking us through, going to more cashless transactions, whether those be touchless, whether those be credit card transactions. You'd mentioned that there are some states and some locales that have laws that prohibit going to 100% cashless. In those locations, have you heard or are aware of any conversations of there being sort of a temporary restriction lifted on those laws to try to mitigate those types of interactions, or are they pushing forward in those jurisdictions to the best of your knowledge in sort of maintaining that law?
The two examples are New York City and San Francisco. There are a couple of others, but no, I haven't seen anything about them backing off yet. But I know more and more people who are thinking about going cashless have probably sort of deflected some of that legislation, really for medical reasons.
Yeah. The next one had to do, really, it's probably for Drew more than anything, but I think both Russ and Rob can hone in on this. Has to do to start with from your ticketing policy. How are you dealing with a decreased capacity of the tickets? How are you identifying who has access to those tickets, who gets priority? And then within that decreased capacity and talking about the one-way traffic flows, there's been some overall concern, I think, in the industry, and there's a question here about it, with respect to, now that we are at that reduced capacity and we might go to one-way rows or aisles, how are we dealing with seating of that reduced capacity to alleviate passing past someone in an aisle on a row? We've got some ideas in our planning, but I'd like to hear from you guys first on sort of how are you identifying that 30% or that 50%?
Sure. So it is an evolutionary process, and right now our leading thought is, clearly trying to go in a priority point order. The request from Mr. Del Conte has been, how do we get in the most number of account holders? How do we get as deep onto that list as we can and still satisfy the requests? And so our ticket ops folks, Terry Pierce and Marty Stokely, have spent a lot of time, along with Amy Folan, of putting together plans of what it could look like. If we shift to the 50% model, it certainly opens up a lot more possibilities to us in order to get to almost a majority of our season ticket account holders. Per se, there's really no social distancing in that case. I think in our stadium, you've got seats anywhere from 18 inches wide to 30 inches wide in the stadium. So there's no 6 feet if you're all sitting in a seating bowl like that. And so the thought process may shift fundamentally to, instead of social distancing, if that's not possible, we're going to try to put people in as close to their account, history as we can. But really, it's going down the priority point list to try to get as deep as we can. The clubs present a problem with having to social distance the clubs, and so there's a trickle down effect. If you can't get in this club, you would move on to the next club, and it just kind of has a domino effect there. But we're trying to take care of all of our premium space holders. Our suites, as far as we've been informed, our suites, since they're enclosed, it's kind of at the tolerance level of the suite holder. They have individual restrooms in them, so there's not a real concern of a restroom capacity and counterflow there, and social distancing. So that's kind of a saving grace for our suite holders. In terms of if we are social distancing at that 30 to 35%, Terry and Marty again have done a great job of putting together seat maps that do allow for rows of seats to be the pass through, and to not seat every single row, and looking at our buying habits of our top 5,000 donors. How do we seat people in clumps of 4 or 6 or 2? How do we get you safely in and out? And as I mentioned earlier, with the way our football stadium is built, with the 2 portals in the bowl, we can bring you in one way and out the other way with as minimal, and again, back to Russ made a great point about the tolerance level. Depending on your tolerance level of just passing by someone, especially if you're wearing a mask and you're not stopping, there does seem to be a tolerance level of just being able to pass on an aisle to get to a portal. Now, the gathering in portals, that presents a problem for sure, but if we're talking about just a brief encounter, that does not seem to be posing a health risk at this time, according to our medical professionals.
Sort of similarly on that note of passing by people and sort of individuals' comfort level, individuals' ability to follow the rules. Russ, I'm going to throw this one to you. With respect to sort of getting people to follow rules that are new, that are maybe not as clear, what are you seeing some operational protocols be put in place with respect to assumption of risk, legal language being placed on the entrance signage? How are people handling or planning on handling these events where someone may be sort of not following their rules or misbehaving above and beyond normal means and methods?
So first of all, I expect that there'll be a disclaimer on the final act before you buy a ticket, although there is a great deal of discussion on really how valid the disclaimer will be. It would be very difficult for someone to claim that they weren't really aware of the potential risks associated with COVID, seeing as we all had to go home. So I mean, that's one part of it. I did start to mention messaging. I think overall, listen, in the bell curve of thing, we have this whether that we had COVID or not. There are people who abide by the rules and people who celebrate breaking the rules. I think that having visible and obvious presence there and being consistent in enforcement and communication is going to be really important, because if everybody is doing the same thing in the same way, then the people who are not doing that tend to stand out in almost any environment. I will also tell you that I rely on a saying, basically, when people know someone's paying attention, they behave differently. And so being prepared to have the resources to pay attention and the communication and messaging. It's easy to see how there could be an egregious violation of this, and someone could feel like it's almost equivalent to assault. I think we're going to see a lot of this. But again, as Drew mentioned and what I mentioned before, a lot of this has got to do with the tolerance in your own community and your own circumstances. There isn't anybody who's going to choose to go to a football game at the University of Texas and doesn't know that there is some amount of risk associated with COVID. So just as there are risks associated with just being in a large crowd in general. So I actually, one of the things I'm worried about is I think we're at societally wise, we seem to be slipping on this new skin, maybe more quickly than is prudent, but we'll see what the data says. But I think it's going to come down to that. We're going to be obligated to do all the things that we can do in the best way that we know how to do them. And then we're going to have to figure out how to manage people who are just not going to be accommodating and following those rules.
Good transition to the next question, Russ, and this one's probably back to you, Drew. But with COVID cases spiking again in a lot of the states that have reopened, especially into their phase twos of specific states, and I think there's 22 states now that are showing increases recently. What does that mean for you and your planning? And I think I know the answer, and it continues to evolve. But what are you guys thinking with respect to some of these cases spiking now, or even the plans that you might have for if it was to spike in a second wave later in the fall?
Sure, and that's where, and I'll go back to, and Chris has been very steadfast from day one of work from home, that we get together on a daily basis as an executive team, and every call is led off with Dr. James Bray and Alan Harden, our chief doctor and our head of sports medicine, of giving us the updates and explaining it to us, right? Because the thing that we all saw early on, and I keep CNN over on the TV on the wall and read the ticker and see the counts and things like that. And I've got certainly a tracker on my phone for the Austin cases and the state of Texas cases and hospitalizations and everything like that. But it's so incredibly helpful to have context with that. Because the headlines are there to grab your attention. I mean, I'm a communications major. Writing a good headline is say whatever you need to say to make sure they read more, right? And so what we have been careful of, especially lately, as the big attention grabber headlines, Texas has highest infection date ever. Well, it was also pointed out to us on that particular date was the date they got the results back from their mass prison testing. There is a correlation between the number of tests being done and increasing daily and the increase in infection. The question is infection rate. Is that going up considerably? Hospitalization rate. They gave us a statistic yesterday on our call, and I'm not going to try to quote it because I don't remember it off the top of my head, and it's dangerous to pass along, partial information. But we are nowhere near approaching the hospitalization rate that would cause us to make a major shift in shutting down again at this point. So while numbers may look like they are spiking or whatever, you really do have to dig deeper and make sure that you're seeking the advice of your health authorities and your local officials to really analyze what does that mean? What were the contributing factors to that? We're all paying very close attention, and we've had some massive civil protests here in Austin last weekend, and we're monitoring very closely this next 2-week period. Are we seeing a spike? Are we not seeing a spike? Are we seeing what we expected to see? What is that data going to tell us as we move forward? I look at a place called Zilker Park, which is kind of a small central park for Austin, and you had thousands. I mean, the photographs are amazing. I love what I see there from a political standpoint, from a civil rights and social justice standpoint. I love what I see there, but it terrifies me as a human being that's dealing with a COVID virus and an industry that depends on large crowd gatherings. That scares me. So I am interested to see what comes of that. Should we see a spike in infection rates and certainly hospitalization rates in the fall during football season? Part of the impetus of going to mobile ticketing. We would be able to reseat the stadium, turn off, turn on tickets as we need to react to a changing environment if in fact we do see that. So we're moving full steam ahead with the idea that we're going to have football games. We're going to have a full football season with patrons in the stand, but we're not. Don't mistake that for sticking our heads in the sands like this is all. It's all going to blow over. We're going to be fine. It's a patron's risk if they come in. We will react, and we've set ourselves up for success in reacting to it by moving to some of this better technology that will allow us to be, Russ, as I think you asked earlier, flexible.
I think I'm going to end it on one last question, and Drew, I think it falls to you again, man. But with respect to your plan moving forward for this fall, talk to us a little bit about your coordination with respect to local health officials and/or the university's health system if they evaluated the plan, if they blessed it, and how you're interacting with them.
Yeah, we're being very mindful, and like I mentioned at the start, these slides were really taken from an executive summary document that was sent to the president's office for review, and we stay in close contact. I mean, we're folks that are unfamiliar with the University of Texas at Austin. We're in the heart of downtown Austin, in a major metropolitan city, and so our communication with local health and safety and law enforcement officials is on a weekly basis. In fact, we have a large-scale monthly meeting with all of the people that touch a game day, and we bring in the university campus officials, the local and state officials to sit down and discuss all the changing topics of the day, just around events in general, and that has ramped up during this. So we absolutely are consulting local and state resources, as well as our campus resources, to make sure that our plans are vetted. The last thing that we want to do is to think we can get out there on our own and have the best idea on earth. That's a recipe for disaster. So we're involving all those people at the highest levels to make sure, no one has the answer. There's not one person you can call that says, oh, this is the way you need to do it. This is what's proven to work. We don't know that. We haven't proven anything yet. And so we're just making sure that all of us are comfortable on the same page, knowing that there's an inherent risk here. We know that, but are we all on the same page that the decisions we're making are the best decisions we can make right now, given the information that we have right now? And again, last I checked, it's 2:15 Central Time on June the 10th. So we're a long way from having, the snapping the football and seeing what works and what doesn't.
Oh, that's very good. So I appreciate, again, all of your time, Russ, Drew, Rob, Hannah and Tom with LEAD1. Thank you for putting this together. This was a really informative session. Thank you to everybody who attended. It's an ever-evolving conversation. Look, we don't have all of the answers. We're going to continue to work together in a sharing fashion moving forward so that we all come out of this successful. We're doing our part. We're actually launching our Back to Sports guide in its most recent form as possible. Goes live next week, so be on the lookout for that. Otherwise, I'll kick it over to Tom for a couple last comments, but thank you to everybody.
Hey, Ryan, thank you very much. And thanks, Gensler Sport, and thank all the panelists, Drew, Ross, Rob, for your wonderful insights. We will be sending out a recording and a summary of this probably tomorrow, and so folks can listen in again and get into all the details. But I really do appreciate your participation in today's webinar. We're also excited to announce part 2 of LEAD1's Reopening Venues webinar, which will occur next week at exactly the same time, 1 week from today, next Wednesday from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we will be specifically looking at ticketing strategies, some of the things that Drew and others of you talked about with some of the industry's leading experts. And again, if any folks in the audience want to reach Ryan or any of our panelists, just email Hannah and we'll get you all their contact information. Invitations will go out for our next webinar very shortly, and we encourage you all to join that webinar as well. Again, thank you all for participating, and as they say, stay safe and healthy. Thank you.